Man, it's been a while since I did a Warframe video. Let me try and remember how this even works. Hello, I am Blaze, and welcome back to Warframe. Today... Wait, what are we doing today? Octavia... boring. Cycron, I'd rather not jump straight into tearing something apart. Nidus, kind of that awkward spot between where he's too new to be considered jumping into the past and too old to be otherwise relevant right now. Oberon's tweaks are helpful, but there are some strange choices. Nothing really sounds that compelling. There's an idea. Hello, I am Blaze, and welcome back to Warframe. And today I'd like to talk about the Warframe with possibly the highest skill ceiling, and skill floor for that matter, in the game, which finally got their shiny golden prime version a few short months ago. This is Banshee. Banshee is a frame that apparently has a history of being quite maligned by a lot of the player base, exactly because of the high skill floor I mentioned a moment ago. In order to even use her effectively, you, at a minimum, need to have some sense of how and when to engage or disengage the enemy hordes, a proficiency in quick movement, which admittedly has gotten much easier with the new movement system introduced mid-2015, good situational awareness, as well as physical skill with aiming to take advantage of her abilities. Playing Banshee is very much a trial by fire. If you know what you're doing, then she can lay down potentially absurd amounts of damage, leave groups of enemies unable to do anything useful, or provide very useful support for her team. If you don't know what you're doing, she's going to readily disintegrate because she's made of wet tissue paper, and most of her abilities don't do any actual damage on their own, unlike most other Warframes. With Banshee, the training wheels are less off and more have been launched into the sun. Banshee can be acquired through researching her at your clan dojo's Tenno lab, and being one of the earlier frames, she has a pretty relaxed resource cost, both for her research and her foundry crafting. Her primed version, as with other prime warframes and weapons, must be farmed for using Orokin relics. The primed pieces can also be traded between players if you don't want to do the relic hunting yourself. She is also still currently available through Prime Access, but not for too much longer, as hers will be retired at the end of this May to prepare for what is likely Oberon Prime. Statistically, she focuses on high movement speed and increased power capacity. Good things, as you're going to need to take advantage of both to utilize her effectively. Standing at the standard base health and shields at 100 each, going up to 300 at rank 30, and with a negligible armor rating of 15, she is a very fragile frame. But she has the benefit of a 1.1 sprint speed multiplier, and a high 150 base power capacity, which goes up to 225 as she levels up to rank 30. She comes along with 2 Magirai mod polarities by default, which is useful for continuity or one of the various power strength mods, and another Magirai polarity in her aura slot, which is particularly useful for steel charge for a significant mod capacity boost when equipped. Her primed version comes along with the benefit of an increased armor rating of 65, though this won't help much, an increased base power capacity of 175, which goes up to 262.5 at rank 30 and results in some very impressive numbers if you include primed flow, an even faster 1.15 sprint speed multiplier, and an extra Naramon polarity in her mod slots. Banshee's passive ability is Suppressor. Her ability to manipulate sound to her whim causes all weapons wielded by her to be considered completely silent at all times. This is actually surprisingly helpful as it slows down the ability of enemies to respond to her when playing alone, and reduces the amount of attention she attracts when playing as part of a team, which gives her some very welcome extra breathing room to make use of her abilities. Banshee's first ability is Sonic Boom. For 25 energy, she sends out a blast wave in a 180-degree arc in front of her to ragdoll and knock back enemies within 15 meters that she has a clear line of sight to. This can launch enemies off ledges, and they will need to spend a few seconds getting back up on their feet. The ability does also deal some damage, but at a grand total of 50 impact damage, it's pretty much safe to ignore that part entirely. The reach of the blast wave is affected by power range mods, and the damage is affected by power strength mods. The available augment for Sonic Boom is Sonic Fracture. All of her augment mods can be traded between players or can be bought directly from the syndicates of the Perrin Sequence or Cephalon Suda for 25,000 standing. Sonic Fracture causes enemies hit by Sonic Boom to have their armor stripped away by 70% for 8 seconds. The timer is a little bit of a downer, but it isn't a big deal. What is important is to note that a 43% boosted power strength and above, this allows Sonic Boom to completely remove enemy armor, which can be incredibly useful for high-level enemies, on top of already being a cheap and wide-reaching knockdown for crowd control. Her second ability is Sonar. For 50 energy, Banshee will emit pulses of energy to highlight all enemies within 35 meters of her on her and her teammates' minimaps. Additionally, each enemy in range will have a glowing weak spot generated somewhere on their body for the 30-second ability duration. Striking the highlighted area amplifies damage dealt by 500%, which combined with power strength mods to increase that multiplier further can result in some truly ludicrous numbers. You can even recast Sonar to plant more targets on enemies in the vicinity if you want to make the significant damage boost easier to go for. Likewise, the duration of the weak spots and the enemy's minimap presence are affected by duration mods, and the reach of Sonar is affected by power range mods. Sonar's augment mod is Resonance, and acts as a very major reward for players able to effectively utilize the generated weak points. Resonance causes enemies killed by a strike to the glowing weak point to emit a secondary burst of sonar, causing all other enemies within a large radius of their late comrade to gain yet more weak points on top of the ones given to them by the main sonar cast for the remaining ability duration. This secondary emission does seem to have a short cooldown between activation opportunities, but the weak points will continue to generate as long as the ability remains active and as long as you can keep accurately hitting those targets, which with great skill can result in the entire room being walking weak points that take massive damage. It can become extremely impressive, particularly if your teammates are also aiming at and successfully triggering more secondary pulses. Because, oh yes, they spread with everyone else's help too. Plus, the sound effect for the sonar pulse that happens when the enemy you're targeting dies is a very satisfying confirmation of hitting the weak point, which I definitely appreciate. Banshee's third ability is Silence. Channeling her control over sound into an aura around her which remains active for 30 seconds, she will deafen all enemies within 20 meters of her by default and cause them to keel over due to sensory overload for a few moments while they enter the area. This makes enemies harder to alert as they won't be able to hear their comrades, gunfire or whatever else. But they are only deafened for the duration. They can still see you. She is not Loki. Silence doesn't make you invisible. Silence also comes along with the somewhat bothersome side effect of mostly deafening Banshee herself and rendering all other sounds muffled, except for a stylized wind noise that will play as long as the ability is active, so that might get a bit tiring. The main thing to note about Silence, however, is the momentary stun. This allows for Banshee to be a moving area of crowd control, albeit using a very brief incapacitation. This can be used to her advantage when combined with swift movement, as putting an enemy out of range and going back in range will trigger the sensory overload animation again, and this can be repeated as long as Silence is active. This gives Silence a lot of depth in itself, as in order to effectively utilize this stun, it's beneficial to not increase power range by too much. You will probably want there to be a wide enough range to hinder ranged enemies, but a short enough range where you can quickly bullet jump to disengage and re-engage to continue to stun the enemies you want to. This does become a tricky balance, however, as all of her other abilities are really asking for you to add as much range as you can, while Silence arguably becomes very unwieldy after a certain point. As usual, the Silence's aura duration is affected by power duration mods, and its range is affected by power range mods. Silence's augment is Savage Silence, and opens up a completely different playstyle for Banshee in the form of a melee glass cannon berserker. Valkyr may be the queen of melee combat in Warframe, but what Banshee lacks in Valkyr's toughness or outright invincibility, she makes up for in her ability to jump in and completely ruin something's day. Savage Silence causes all enemies affected by Silence to become open to finisher attacks, which completely bypasses armor, and on top of that, Savage Silence also increases received finisher damage by 300% at maximum rank, which can be increased even more with power strength mods. This turns Savage Silence into a souped up version of Valkyr's Paralysis, and allows Banshee to act as an assassin frame, as very few enemies other than those outright immune to being opened up to finisher attacks will be able to survive. especially if you bring a dagger with covert lethality, in which case the number drops from very few to fucking nobody. This does come with the downside of not being a particularly fast method of enacting mass murder, however. In time-sensitive missions like survival, where you need to kill a lot of enemies at an accelerated pace, if you're playing solo, then Savage Silence melee finisher chains on individual enemies one by one is too slow. But even so, Savage Silence allows a properly modified Banshee to be an absolute nightmare in close quarters, which for an otherwise fragile frame is extremely impressive and highly entertaining to play. Finally, Banshee's fourth ability is Soundquake. Banshee immobilizes herself and, after a short cast animation, channels her sonic energy into the ground, causing a localized earthquake that forces enemies to stumble around helplessly, while being dealt 200 blast damage per second over 20 meters by default. This comes with significant costs, however. On top of the 25 energy activation cost and draining a default of 12 energy per second, which is an expensive upkeep, you are also immobilizing Banshee, a frame that relies on being able to move to survive, within a game that already emphasizes players remaining highly mobile. Naturally, this means that Soundquake should never be used if you're playing alone, because you're going to burn all of your energy and get shot. However, it does become useful in a team setting, as it allows Banshee to completely lock down everything within range of her and takes pressure off her allies. As per usual, the range of Soundquake is affected by power range mods, the inflicted blast damage is affected by power strength mods, and the energy drain over time is affected by both power duration and power efficiency. I strongly suggest building for a lot of efficiency if you intend to use Soundquake much, if you value having energy to actually use on any of her other abilities. Hand in hand is her current final augment, Resonating Quake. Resonating Quake builds up stacks of resonance up to a maximum of 20, one granted each second, increasing blast damage by 100, range by 1 meter, and energy cost by 1 per second as long as Soundquake is being channeled. This comes with the effects of, after 20 seconds, the damage being increased to 2200 blast damage per second, over 40 meters, with an energy drain of 32 per second without mods. And each of these values is affected by the usual power mods, so this can vary wildly. The end result is that it means Soundquake ends up doing a massive amount of damage over literally the entire of a lot of single objective map tiles, albeit at an extremely steep energy cost. While it is indeed a powerful augment, it turns her into a press 4 to win frame. And, by the way, Soundquake maintains its stagger, so if you're an arsehole, you can also bring a lot of energy restores and constantly use Soundquake to force all your teammates to sit around being bored out of their fucking minds. So, if you decide to go with a Resonating Quake build, please consider using it with some restraint. I enjoy having stuff to shoot at every now and then. Still, it should hopefully be clear that all of her augment mods are useful and serve a purpose, which is very refreshing given that, to my recollection, every other frame has at least one augment of dubious or underwhelming utility. Augment mods aside, her basic skill suite is also useful, though also trickier to make use of than most other Warframes due to having no set and forget abilities whatsoever. They all need some kind of input on your part. Sonic Boom is pretty self-explanatory, due to being an area knockdown, while Resonance demands aiming precision from you to make use of the significant damage multiplier, Silence requires you to move around a lot to keep enemies locked down, and Soundquake immobilizes you, which requires situational awareness on your part. Likewise, her mod loadouts can also vary quite substantially based on which augment mods you want to focus on, and what you want her role to be. I have personally removed the aura mod's polarity to cater to multiple different loadouts, so I'm not locked into mostly just using Steel Charge, though this does result in needing to forma her some extra times to get everything to fit. From there, the main question will be if you want to push out her power range as much as you can for Sonic Boom, Sonar, and Soundquake, or if you want to keep her power range restrained to make use of Silence's stun. My general purpose build includes a little bit of everything. I like both Sonic Fracture and Resonance augments to boost my weapon damage and deal with enemy armor, combined with a total of 45% increased power strength from an Intensify and a Power Drift mod to let Sonic Fracture completely remove armor. as well as a balance of some duration, range, and efficiency to allow me to use everything reasonably effectively, and including vitality and redirection to give her at least some chance of surviving any of the nearby enemies, giving her a slightly annoyed look. On page 2 is my Savage Silence build. I have no idea if this is the typical Savage Silence build, but this is what I arrived at myself after some testing. I elected to ignore power strength as the finisher damage seems powerful enough on its own without further modification, instead going for an extremely high power duration to keep the silence aura around for a much longer time. On top of this is the Steel Charge aura, an obvious choice for a melee finisher build, but I can switch this out for anything else if I need to, as well as including Rage, Quick Thinking, and Primed Flow. The typical battle plan for high level enemies is to quickly dash into the silence aura range. Banshee will probably take some hits during this, so Rage can be used to restore her energy. When in range, a channeled melee finisher with Life Strike will pretty much always fully heal her, allowing her to soak more damage to restore more energy. Quick Thinking is there as a safety net for the occasions where she takes one too many hits, allowing her to survive long enough to restore her health back to full. Though don't rely on it too much because Quick Thinking does still have that stupid, ridiculous stagger that shouldn't really be there anymore. This tactic runs pretty tight, but it absolutely relies on the short stun of silence to keep incoming damage manageable, but it seems to have worked pretty well. And there's also building for Resonating Quake, which I will not be showing because I don't really want to encourage this nonsense. It turns Soundquake into a press 4 to win ability. I'm sure it isn't too hard to take a guess at what kind of build that would utilize. Banshee is a frame I hadn't really used much in the past, mostly because I too was a casual scrub that didn't understand how to use her all that time ago, before I started making videos about Warframe. However, given her recent primed incarnation, and having far more experience at this point, I gave her another try. What I found was a very difficult but potentially extremely powerful and rewarding Warframe. She certainly seems like she would be a hard frame to master, and she is also very tricky to learn in the first place. Banshee has a habit of demonstrating that there is something wrong with your playstyle by suffering from sudden catastrophic existence failure. But for the most part, she legitimately has all of the tools at her disposal that she needs, and it falls to you to utilize those tools effectively. So, if you haven't already, give Banshee a fair try. You can end up learning a lot about the way you play Warframe, and you might find her to be to your tastes in the end. Thank you for watching my look at Banshee. All comments are appreciated, and I hope to see you around next time. For other Warframe content, you can give a click over to my look at the earlier Venka and Cernos Prime weapons. For something totally different, you can check out my video on Elite Dangerous. Or for someone who actually knows how to play Banshee better than pretty much anyone, there is also Quite Shallow, whom I suspect most of you already know about anyway, but giving her a nod in a Banshee video kinda feels obligatory. And as always, good luck, have fun, and take care.